A thunderous crack split the air as lightning struck a nearby pine, illuminating the darkening Montana sky and revealing a lone figure on horseback cresting the ridge. Xavier Eastwood pulled his duster tighter against the impending storm, his weathered face grim beneath the brim of his Stetson. The year was 1875, and these foothills of the Bitterroot Mountains held no mercy for travelers caught in their fury. The rain began as fat, heavy drops that quickly transformed into a relentless downpour. Xavier guided his Mustang, Titan, down the muddy trail with practiced ease. At 32, he'd spent more than half his life in the saddle, the last 7 as a ranch foreman outside of Missoula. Now he was heading south, answering a letter from an old friend who'd struck silver near Virginia City. Thunder boomed overhead, causing Titan to snort nervously. Xavier patted the horse's neck reassuringly. "Easy, boy. We'll find shelter soon." As if in answer to his words, he spotted something through the curtain of rain, the dark shape of an overturned wagon half visible in a small clearing just off the trail. Xavier frowned and nudged Titan toward it. Travelers in trouble, most likely. As he approached, he made out more details. It was a modest covered wagon, its canvas torn and one wheel shattered. The wagon bed had split, tilting at a precarious angle, no sign of horses or oxen. His experienced eye could tell this wasn't a recent accident, probably happened during the flash floods 3 days prior. "Hello," Xavier called out, dismounting carefully in the mud. "Anyone here?" At first, only the drumming of rain answered him. Then he heard a faint cry from beneath the wreckage. Xavier's heart pounded as he splashed through puddles toward the sound. "Hold on. I'm coming." He dropped to his knees, peering into the dark space beneath the broken wagon bed. In the shadows lay a young woman, her face pale and streaked with dirt. One of her legs was pinned beneath the wagon's frame, though not crushed a small mercy. Her chestnut hair was matted against her forehead, and her green eyes widened at the sight of him. "Thank God," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I thought no one would come. I'm here now, madam." Xavier removed his hat, rain immediately soaking his dark hair. "Xavier Eastwood, are you badly hurt?" She swallowed hard. "My leg, I can't feel it much anymore, and I'm—" Her hand moved protectively to her swollen abdomen. "I'm with child, 7 months along." Xavier's concern deepened. A pregnant woman trapped for days in this wilderness, it was a miracle she was alive at all. "What's your name, madam?" "Josephine. Josephine Lawson." She tried to shift position and winced. "My husband, Thomas. He went for help 3 days ago when the wagon broke. He hasn't returned." Xavier nodded grimly. 3 days was too long. Either the man had met with an accident or abandoned her. Neither possibility changed what needed doing. "Mrs. Lawson, I'm going to get you out from under there, but I'll need to lift this frame. Can you try to pull yourself clear when I do?" She nodded weakly. "I'll try." Xavier positioned himself at the heaviest part of the damaged frame, bracing his legs in the mud. "On 3, 1, 2, 3. He heaved upward, muscles straining as he lifted the wagon frame just enough. Josephine gasped in pain but managed to drag herself a few precious inches. "Again," she panted. "Please." 3 more attempts later, she was free. Xavier gently helped her away from the wreckage, noticing how she cradled her belly protectively. Her simple calico dress was torn and filthy, and she shivered violently in the rain. "We need to get you warm and dry." Xavier scanned the area and spotted a small overhang in the nearby rocks. "Can you walk if I support you?" "I think so." Her voice was stronger now, determination shining through her exhaustion. With Xavier bearing most of her weight, they made their way to the natural shelter. It wasn't much, but it would keep off the worst of the rain. He helped her sit with her back against the rock wall. then quickly returned to Titan to retrieve his bedroll and saddlebags. After spreading the bedroll for her, Xavier built a small fire in the driest spot he could find, using his tinderbox and the meager dry wood he collected from under fallen logs. Soon, a modest flame pushed back the chill of the evening. "When did you last eat or drink?" he asked, offering his canteen. Josephine took it gratefully. "I had a little water yesterday from the rain, food. It's been 3 days since anything substantial." Xavier nodded and reached into his saddlebags, producing some jerky, hardtack, and dried apples. "It's not much, but it'll help until I can find something better." She ate slowly, carefully, as one who knows hunger might make her sick if she rushed. "You're a godsend, Mr. Eastwood." "Xavier, please." He busied himself tending the fire. "How'd you end up here alone, Mrs. Lawson?" "Josephine," she corrected softly. "We were heading to Helena. Thomas heard there was work for carpenters there." She paused, her hand absently rubbing her belly. "The storm came so suddenly. The wagon wheel broke, and then we hit a rock, I think, and the whole thing tipped." Xavier listened silently, building a mental picture of what had happened. Thomas wasn't hurt badly, just some scrapes. He said he'd follow the trail to the nearest town and bring back help. Her voice faltered. "He should have been back by now." "The nearest settlement is Fort Owen, about 15 miles back," Xavier said. "Beyond that, Missola's another 10. "Something must have happened to him," Josephine insisted, though Xavier detected a hint of doubt in her voice. "He wouldn't leave me." Xavier chose his words carefully. "The trails get tricky after heavy rain. Easy for a man on foot to lose his way." He didn't add that plenty of men, faced with a pregnant wife and hard times, chose to vanish into the vast western territories. A sharp intake of breath from Josephine interrupted his thoughts. Her hand pressed against her side, face contorted. "What is it?" "The baby," she nodded, breathing heavily. "It's been happening on and off. Not labor, I don't think, just pains." Xavier felt a cold fear settle in his stomach. He knew horses and cattle well enough, but a woman with child. This was beyond his experience. "First thing tomorrow, we'll head for Fort Owen," he decided. "They'll have someone who can help you properly." "Thank you." Her eyes met his, filled with a vulnerability that stirred something protective in him. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." "Just fortunate timing," he said gruffly, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Try to rest now. I'll keep watch." As Josephine dozed fitfully by the fire, Xavier stared out at the rain-drenched forest. The storm was passing, stars occasionally visible through breaks in the clouds. He thought of the journey ahead, a pregnant woman in distress, possibly injured, and the nearest doctor a good day's ride away. It wouldn't be easy, but he'd seen enough death in his life. He wasn't about to let this woman and her unborn child join that tally. Morning broke clear and crisp, the storm's fury replaced by the gentle dripping of water from pine needles and leaves. Xavier had dozed intermittently through the night, always keeping the fire fed. Josephine had slept more deeply than he expected, exhaustion finally claiming her. She stirred as sunlight touched her face, momentarily confused before recognition dawned. "You're still here," she murmured. "I feared I'd dreamed you." Xavier offered a rare smile. "No dream, madam." "How are you feeling?" Josephine winced as she shifted position. "My leg aches something fierce, but I can move it." She demonstrated, rotating her ankle carefully. "And the baby's been quiet. That's good news." Xavier handed her the canteen. "We should get moving soon. The weather's cleared, but no telling how long that'll last up here." While Josephine drank, Xavier retrieved what little he could salvage from her wagon, a small trunk with some clothing, a worn Bible, and a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. He found no food supplies or weapons, which troubled him. If her husband had taken the only gun, it left them vulnerable. "Is this everything you want to keep?" he asked, bringing the items to her. Josephine nodded, relief evident in her expression. "I thought I'd lost it all. The letters are from my mother before she passed, and the Bible was hers." Xavier secured the trunk to Titan's saddle. "There's no sign of your team. Must have broken free during the accident." "The oxen," she shook her head sadly. "They were old but reliable. Thomas said they'd fetch a fair price in Helena once we arrived." Xavier helped Josephine to her feet, noting how she tried to hide her discomfort. "I'm going to lift you onto Titan. You'll ride, I'll walk alongside. But no arguments, Mrs. Lawson. You're in no condition to be walking miles through this terrain." She acquiesced, allowing him to boost her onto the saddle. Xavier adjusted his duster around her shoulders, protection against the morning chill. With Josephine settled, they began their journey toward Fort Owen. The going was slow but steady. The trail wound through pine forests and across small streams swollen from the recent rain. Xavier led Titan carefully, one hand always ready to steady Josephine if she swayed. They spoke little at first, both conserving their energy for the journey. By midday, they stopped near a creek for rest. Xavier helped Josephine down and supported her to a fallen log where she could sit comfortably. "You never said what brings you to these parts," she said as he filled the canteen from the clear water. Xavier considered how much to share. "Heading south to Virginia City. Got a friend there who claims he's found enough silver to make us both rich men." He shrugged. "Figure it's worth seeing for myself." "You don't sound convinced." "I've heard similar tales before. Usually ends with empty pockets and broken dreams." He handed her the canteen. "But Jim Hollister's an honest sort. If he says there's silver, there probably is." Josephine drank before responding. "And if there is, what then?" "Buy my own spread, I suppose. Been working other men's land long enough." The admission surprised him. He rarely shared such thoughts. A worthy ambition. She smiled, and Xavier was struck by how it transformed her face, even through the exhaustion and worry. She couldn't be much more than 25, he realized. "What about you?" he asked. "Helena's just a stop, or were you planning to settle there?" "It depends on Thomas finding steady work." A shadow crossed her features. "We've moved 4 times in 3 years of marriage. California first, then Oregon, then Washington Territory. Each place was going to be the one where we'd build our life." She touched her belly gently. "I was hoping Helena would be the last move before the baby comes." Xavier nodded, hearing what she wasn't saying, a story of dashed hopes and a husband always chasing the next opportunity. It was common enough in the West, where fortunes could change overnight. "We should keep moving," he said, helping her back onto Titan. "Few more hours and we'll reach Fort Owen before dark." As they continued, Josephine became increasingly quiet. Xavier noticed her face occasionally tightening with pain she tried to hide. "The baby again?" he asked after one particularly long silence. She nodded reluctantly. "More frequent now. I'm worried." "How far along did you say?" 7 months, almost 8, she admitted, "but it's too soon." The midwife in Portland said January, not October. Xavier felt that cold fear return. He'd seen calves and foals born too early. Few survived without proper care. A human baby would need even more. "Fort Owen might have a doctor," he said, hoping it was true. "If not, there's definitely one in Missoula. And if we can't reach either in time," her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "We will," Xavier said firmly. "Titan's the strongest horse I've ever owned, and I've delivered my share of calves. Between us, we'll manage." She smiled faintly at his bravado. "Are you always this confident, Xavier Eastwood?" "Only when I've got no choice," he admitted, which earned him a small laugh. They traveled another hour before Xavier noticed Titan's ears prick forward. The Mustang nickered softly, sensing something ahead. Xavier's hand moved instinctively to the Colt revolver at his hip. "What is it?" Josephine whispered. "Probably nothing," he replied, though his body remained tense. "Stay alert." Around the next bend, they encountered a small party of Salish men on horseback. Xavier relaxed slightly. The Bitterroot Salish were generally peaceful, especially near Fort Owen where they often traded. The leader, a man of perhaps 40 with obsidian eyes that missed nothing, raised his hand in greeting. "Halo," he called out, using the Chinook jargon that served as a trade language. "Halo," Xavier responded in kind. "We're headed to Fort Owen. Woman needs help." The man studied Josephine with concern, then spoke rapidly to his companions. One rode forward, offering a small pouch. "Medicine," the leader explained. "For pain. Wife of Chief Victor's son knows these things." Xavier accepted the gift with genuine gratitude. "Thank you. Is the trail clear ahead?" The man nodded. "No trouble. 2 hours maybe you reach Fort." After exchanging a few more words, the Salish continued on their way north. Xavier examined the pouch, finding dried herbs that gave off a pleasant, earthy aroma. "You think it's safe?" Josephine asked dubiously. "The Salish know their medicines better than most white doctors," Xavier said. "My mother was half Cheyenne. She used similar remedies." He sniffed the herbs again. "This looks like willow bark and something else. Good for pain and fever." Josephine looked surprised. "Your mother was native." Xavier's face closed slightly. "Does that trouble you?" "No," she said quickly. You didn't mention it. Most people don't take kindly to it, so I don't often bring it up." His tone was matter of fact rather than bitter. "But it's why I know these mountains better than most. Spent summers with my mother's cousins while my father was working the mines." He showed her how to chew a small piece of the willow bark. "It's bitter, but it helps." Josephine grimaced at the taste but didn't complain. Within a half hour, her face had relaxed somewhat. "It's working," she admitted. "The pain's not gone, but it's less sharp now." The trail began to widen as they continued, a sign they were approaching more traveled routes. By late afternoon, they spotted smoke from chimneys rising in the distance. "Fort Owen," Xavier confirmed. "We'll have you seeing a doctor before sundown." Relief flooded Josephine's features, but it was short-lived. Without warning, she doubled over in the saddle, crying out in pain. Xavier caught her before she could fall, easing her down from Titan's back. "What's happening?" "The baby," she gasped, clutching her abdomen. "Something's wrong." "It's too early, Xavier. It's too early." He looked frantically toward the distant fort, still at least an hour away at their current pace. Then he looked at Josephine's face, contorted in pain, and made his decision. "Hold on," he said, lifting her back onto Titan. This time he mounted behind her, securing her against his chest with one arm while taking the reins with his free hand. "Titan can carry us both for a short distance. We're going to ride hard." Xavier kicked the Mustang into a gallop, praying the horse's sure-footedness would prevent a fall on the rough trail. Josephine clung to his arm, each jolt of the horse's hooves drawing a muffled cry from her lips. They covered the remaining distance in half the time it would have taken walking. As they approached the fort's gates, Xavier shouted for assistance. 2 men ran out to meet them, catching Titan's reins as Xavier carefully dismounted with Josephine in his arms. "She needs a doctor," he explained breathlessly. "She's with child and in distress." "Doc Simmons is here," one of the men said, leading the way into the fort. "Trading post's got rooms upstairs. We can take her there." The trading post was a sturdy 2-story building in the center of Fort Owen's modest collection of structures. Inside, they were met by the proprietor, a rotund man named Wilson, who immediately called for his wife. Mrs. Wilson appeared, took one look at Josephine, and began issuing orders like a general. "Upstairs, first room on the left. Sarah," she called to a young woman dusting shelves. Fetch Doc Simmons. Tell him it's urgent and bring hot water and clean linens." Xavier carried Josephine up the narrow staircase, her breathing increasingly labored. The room was small but clean, with a brass bed and simple furnishings. "Lay her down gentle," Mrs. Wilson instructed. "The doctor will be here shortly." "You her husband?" "No, madam. Found her trapped under a wrecked wagon about 15 miles north of here. Husband went for help 3 days ago and never returned." Mrs. Wilson's expression hardened, left her more like, "Wouldn't be the first." She turned her attention to Josephine. "Don't you worry, dear. We'll take good care of you." Xavier stepped back as Mrs. Wilson began to make Josephine more comfortable, removing her muddy shoes and loosening her dress. He felt suddenly out of place, a rough cowboy in a situation that called for feminine care. "I should see to my horse," he said awkwardly. "I'll be nearby if you need anything." Josephine caught his hand as he turned to leave. "Don't go far," she pleaded, her eyes wide with fear. "Please." "I won't," he promised. "I'll be just downstairs." In the trading post below, Xavier found Mr. Wilson behind the counter. The man nodded respectfully. "Your horse is being taken care of. Sarah's brother's good with animals. Appreciate it." Xavier placed a few coins on the counter. "For the room and care." Wilson pushed the money back. "Put that away. We don't charge for helping folks in need. That's not our way." Xavier nodded gratefully and took a seat by the window, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. Now that the immediate crisis of reaching Fort Owen was past, exhaustion threatened to overtake him. He hadn't slept properly in over 36 hours. Dr. Simmons arrived 10 minutes later, a tall, thin man with spectacles and a serious demeanor. He nodded briefly to Xavier before hurrying upstairs with his black medical bag. Left alone with his thoughts, Xavier found himself praying for the first time in years not to the white man's God, but in the manner his mother had taught him, asking the spirits to protect the woman and child upstairs. Time passed slowly. Customers came and went in the trading post, many casting curious glances at the trail-worn stranger by the window. Xavier paid them little mind, his attention fixed on the ceiling above, straining to hear any news. Nearly 2 hours later, Dr. Simmons descended the stairs, his face grave. Xavier stood immediately. "How is she?" "She's stable for now," the doctor said. "But she's showing signs of early labor. The trauma of being trapped, combined with dehydration and exposure, has put significant stress on both mother and child." "Can you stop it?" Dr. Simmons sighed. "I've given her laudanum for the pain and something to try to slow the contractions, but nature often has its own timetable. If the baby comes now at just over 7 months, well, the odds aren't favorable." Xavier felt a heaviness in his chest. "What happens next?" "We wait. Watch. Pray if you're inclined." The doctor adjusted his spectacles. "Mrs. Wilson will stay with her through the night. I'll return in the morning unless I'm needed sooner." "Can I see her, briefly? She needs rest." The doctor studied Xavier curiously. "You're not her husband, I understand." "No, just happened upon her." "Well, it's fortunate you did. Another day out there alone and we might have lost them both." Dr. Simmons gathered his hat. "You might consider getting some rest yourself, Mr. Eastwood." "Xavier Eastwood." "Mr. Eastwood, you look dead on your feet." Xavier nodded but made his way upstairs instead of seeking a place to sleep. He knocked softly on the door of Josephine's room. Mrs. Wilson opened it, her expression softening at the sight of him. "She's been asking for you," she whispered. "Just a few minutes, mind. The laudanum's taking effect." Xavier entered quietly. Josephine lay in the brass bed, her chestnut hair spread across the pillow, face pale but peaceful. Her eyes fluttered open as he approached. "Xavier," she murmured, voice thick from the medication. "The baby is going to be fine," he said with more confidence than he felt. Doctor says you both need rest." She reached for his hand, her grip weak. "Thank you for everything." "No need for thanks. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said, surprisingly lucid despite the laudanum. "Not anyone. Most would have passed by, or worse." Her eyes drifted closed, then opened again with effort. "Will you stay? In Fort Owen, I mean, until—" "I'll stay," Xavier promised, surprising himself. Virginia City and Jim Hollister's silver could wait. "Now rest. I'll be nearby if you need anything." A ghost of a smile touched her lips before she surrendered to sleep. Xavier gently withdrew his hand and nodded to Mrs. Wilson before leaving the room. Downstairs, Mr. Wilson offered him use of a small storage room with a cot. "It's not fancy, but it's private. Better than the saloon across the way." Xavier accepted gratefully. After seeing to Titan and retrieving his saddlebags, he collapsed onto the narrow cot. Despite his exhaustion, sleep eluded him at first, his mind full of worries for the woman and child upstairs. Eventually, though, fatigue claimed him, pulling him into a deep, dreamless sleep. He woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and the sounds of the trading post coming to life. For a moment, he was disoriented, then memory rushed back. Josephine, the baby. Xavier rose quickly, splashed water on his face from the basin provided, and made himself presentable before heading to the main room of the trading post. Mrs. Wilson was there, serving coffee to early customers. "How is she?" he asked without preamble. Mrs. Wilson's face was tired but not grim. "Made it through the night without the labor progressing. Doctor says that's a good sign." Relief washed through him. "Can I see her?" "After you've had something to eat," Mrs. Wilson insisted. "Sarah's bringing her breakfast now. Give them a few minutes." Xavier nodded. Accepting the plate of eggs and biscuits Mrs. Wilson pushed toward him. He ate mechanically, hardly tasting the food, his mind upstairs with Josephine. When he finally entered her room, he was pleased to see color had returned to her cheeks. She was propped up against pillows, a half-eaten plate of food on the bedside table. "You look better," he observed, taking the chair beside her bed. "I feel better. The pains have stopped, at least for now." She adjusted the blanket covering her. "Dr. Simmons says I need complete bed rest for at least 2 weeks." Xavier nodded. "That's doable. You don't have to stay," she said, though her eyes said otherwise. "You've done more than enough already." "I said I'd stay, and I will." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Besides, Virginia City's been there a long time. It'll wait a few more weeks." Gratitude shone in her eyes. "The Wilsons have been very kind, but I have no way to pay for lodging that long. The money Thomas and I had was with him." Xavier frowned. "Don't worry about that. I've got enough saved." "I can't accept—" "You can and you will," he interrupted firmly. "Consider it a loan if your pride demands it." She studied him for a long moment. "You're an unusual man, Xavier Eastwood. So I've been told." He shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. "I'll speak with Mr. Wilson about arranging longer lodging. Dr. Simmons is coming back later to check on you." "Thank you," she said simply. Xavier nodded and stood to leave, suddenly needing air. At the door, he paused. "Is there anything you need? From town, I mean." She hesitated. "Perhaps some clean clothes and a comb. Mrs. Wilson offered to lend me things, but—" "Say no more." He tipped his hat. "I'll see what I can find." The next 2 days fell into a pattern. Xavier spent mornings doing odd jobs around Fort Owen to earn his keep, mending fences, breaking horses for the stable owner, helping load wagons. Afternoons, he sat with Josephine, reading to her from her mother's Bible or simply talking. Evenings, he took his meals at the saloon, listening to local news and gossip. Word about the pregnant woman rescued by a passing cowboy spread quickly in the small community. Several women from the fort and surrounding homesteads brought gifts: a quilt, homemade preserves, a tiny knitted cap for the baby. Josephine accepted their kindness with grace, though Xavier noticed she avoided questions about her husband. On the third day, as Xavier was chopping wood behind the trading post, Dr. Simmons approached him. "Mr. Eastwood, might I have a word?" Xavier embedded the axe in the chopping block and wiped his brow. "Of course. Is something wrong with Mrs. Lawson?" No, she's stable. In fact, I'm quite pleased with her progress." The doctor hesitated. "It's about her husband. I've made inquiries in Missoula as you suggested. There's no record of a Thomas Lawson seeking help there in the past week." Xavier's jaw tightened. "I suspected as much. There's more. A man fitting his description sold a pair of oxen in Missoula 4 days ago, paid for passage on the eastbound stage the same day." The confirmation of what Xavier had suspected brought no satisfaction. "Have you told her?" "No." Dr. Simmons adjusted his spectacles nervously. "I thought perhaps." "Coming from you." "It would be better coming from a friend," Xavier finished for him. "Precisely. She seems to trust you implicitly." Xavier sighed heavily. "I'll tell her, but not today. She's still too fragile." The doctor nodded in agreement. "A wise decision. Give her a few more days of peace." Those few days passed quickly. Josephine continued to improve, the danger of premature labor receding. She began to sit up for longer periods, even taking short walks around her room with Xavier's support. Her spirits lifted, and she spoke increasingly of the future, though Xavier noticed she mentioned her husband less and less. A week after their arrival at Fort Owen, Xavier knew he could delay no longer. He entered her room after lunch, finding her by the window, gazing out at the mountains. "Beautiful view," he commented, joining her. "It reminds me of my childhood home in Oregon," she said softly. "We lived near Mount Hood. I used to think the mountain was watching over us." Xavier steeled himself. "Josephine, there's something I need to tell you." She turned to him, her expression changing as she read his face. "It's Thomas, isn't it?" Dr. Simmons made inquiries in Missoula. Xavier didn't soften the truth. "Thomas sold your oxen there 4 days ago and took the eastbound stage. He's not coming back." Josephine was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "I know." Xavier blinked in surprise. "You know, part of me has known since the second day under that wagon." She returned to gazing out the window. It wasn't the first time he'd threatened to leave. Just the first time he actually did it. "I'm sorry. Don't be." She turned back to him, eyes dry but sad. "Our marriage was a mistake from the beginning. I was 18, naive, desperate to escape my uncle's home after my parents died. Thomas was handsome, charming, full of dreams." She sighed. "The dreams never materialized, and the charm wore thin after a year of moving from place to place, always one step ahead of his creditors." Xavier listened silently, seeing the pieces fall into place. "When I told him about the baby, he seemed happy at first, then frightened, then resentful." She placed a protective hand over her belly. "The accident was convenient for him, a way out without facing what he was doing." "That doesn't excuse it," Xavier said, anger edging his voice. "No, it doesn't." Josephine smiled sadly. "But I'm almost grateful. If he'd stayed, I might have spent years trying to make a marriage work that was broken from the start." "What will you do now?" "I don't know," she admitted. "I have no family, no money, and a baby coming in 2 months." Her voice quavered slightly before she regained control. "But I'll figure something out. I always do." Xavier made his decision in that moment, though he'd been considering it for days. "Come to Virginia City with me." She looked at him in surprise. "What? After you're strong enough to travel, after the baby comes, come with me to Virginia City?" The words tumbled out before he could second-guess himself. "Jim Hollister's wife died 2 years ago. He runs a boarding house there along with his mining interests. You could help manage it, have a place to live, income for you and the child. Josephine stared at him. Why would you do this? Because you deserve a fresh start, he said simply. And because I'd rest easier knowing you and the little one were safe. Tears welled in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll think about it, Xavier suggested. We've got time. The weeks that followed brought changes to both of them. Josephine grew stronger physically, though her pregnancy advanced visibly. Xavier found himself increasingly drawn to her company, their conversations extending late into evenings. He discovered she was well educated, with a quick mind and dry wit that emerged as she became more comfortable with him. For her part, Josephine observed the quiet strength in Xavier, the gentleness that belied his rugged exterior. She noticed how children at the fort gravitated to him, how he always had time for their questions and games despite his busy days. October turned to November, the mountains donning their winter mantle of snow. Josephine moved from the trading post to a small cabin owned by the Wilsons, where she had more privacy. Xavier took a room at the saloon but spent most of his waking hours either working or with Josephine. They developed routines. Mornings, Xavier would bring fresh bread from Mrs. Wilson's kitchen. Afternoons, they'd sit by the fire while he read aloud from books borrowed from Fort Owen's small library. Evenings, they'd share simple meals and talk of their pasts or childhood in Oregon, his years as a ranch hand and occasional scout for the Army. 2 weeks before Christmas, on a clear, cold afternoon, Xavier returned from chopping wood to find Josephine standing in the doorway of her cabin, face pale. "It's time," she said calmly. "The baby's coming." Xavier's heart raced, but he kept his voice steady. "I'll fetch Dr. Simmons." Hours later, Xavier paced outside the cabin, listening to the muffled sounds within. Mrs. Wilson had joined the doctor, bringing her experience as a mother of 5 to the birthing room. Snow began to fall as evening approached, large flakes drifting lazily from a steel-gray sky. The door finally opened shortly after dusk. Mrs. Wilson emerged, her face wreathed in smiles despite her obvious fatigue. "A boy," she announced. "Healthy and strong despite coming a few weeks early. 7 pounds if he's an ounce." Relief flooded through Xavier. "And Josephine?" "Exhausted but well. She's asking for you." Inside, the cabin was warm and dim, lit by oil lamps and the glow of the fireplace. Dr. Simmons was packing his bag, looking pleased with the outcome. "Mother and child doing admirably," he confirmed. "You can see them, but just briefly. They both need rest." Xavier approached the bed where Josephine lay propped against pillows, her hair damp with perspiration but her face radiant. In her arms, wrapped in a soft blanket, was a tiny bundle. "Xavier," she whispered, her voice tired but joyful. "Meet William Xavier Lawson." Emotion tightened his throat as he gazed at the infant's face, perfect, peaceful, with a dusting of dark hair. "William Xavier, after my father and the man who saved us both." She smiled up at him. "Would you like to hold him?" Hesitantly, Xavier reached for the baby, cradling him with care born of inexperience. William's eyes opened briefly dark blue, unfocused, then closed again in sleep. "He's perfect," Xavier said softly, handing the child back to his mother. "You did well, Josephine." "We did well," she corrected. "I wouldn't be here without you." Neither would he. The weeks following William's birth transformed the small cabin into a home. Xavier moved his few belongings from the saloon, taking up residence in the small front room to help with night feedings and to provide protection through the harsh Montana winter. Christmas came and went, celebrated simply but joyfully. Xavier carved a small wooden horse for William, though the infant was far too young to appreciate it. Josephine knitted Xavier a scarf, working on it secretly during his absences. The Wilsons and other friends from Fort Owen brought gifts and food, turning the holiday into an impromptu gathering that left both Xavier and Josephine feeling blessed despite their circumstances. As January yielded to February and William grew stronger daily, they began to discuss the future more concretely. The passes should clear by April, Xavier observed one evening as they sat by the fire, William sleeping soundly in the cradle he'd constructed. "We could make for Virginia City then, if you're still interested." Josephine looked up from her mending. "Are you sure Jim Hollister won't mind? A woman with an infant might not be what he had in mind for his boarding house. Jim's the most soft-hearted man I know, though he'd deny it fiercely." Xavier smiled at the thought of his old friend. He lost a son years ago before his wife passed. Having a baby around might be good for him. Josephine studied him thoughtfully. "And you? What will you do once we reach Virginia City?" It was a question Xavier had been asking himself with increasing frequency. His original plan to partner with Jim in the silver mine, perhaps buy land nearby, now seemed somehow incomplete. "Help Jim with the mine, I suppose. See if there's ranch land available in the area." He met her gaze. "Stay close by if you'll allow it. I'd like to watch William grow." Color rose in Josephine's cheeks. "I'd like that too." A comfortable silence fell between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. The following weeks brought subtle changes to their relationship. Hands touching when passing the baby. Lingering glances across the dinner table. Conversations that stretched late into the night, moving from practical matters to deeper topics, hopes, fears, dreams for the future. One March evening, as a late winter storm howled outside their snug cabin, Xavier found himself watching Josephine as she nursed William by the fire. The intimacy of the scene struck him, not just the mother and child, but his own place within this makeshift family they'd created. "What are you thinking?" Josephine asked, noticing his contemplative expression. Xavier hesitated, then decided on honesty. "That I never expected to find this." "Find what?" "This." He gestured to encompass the cabin, the three of them. "A sense of belonging. Of purpose beyond the next job or trail." Josephine's eyes softened. "I know what you mean. After Thomas left, I thought William and I would face the world alone. Instead, we found you. Or I found you," Xavier said, remembering that rain-soaked day that now seemed like a lifetime ago. "Trapped under a broken wagon." William finished nursing, and Josephine adjusted her clothing before gently burping him against her shoulder. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd taken a different trail that day?" "Sometimes," Xavier admitted. "But then I look at you both and I'm grateful I didn't." Their eyes met across the room, a current of unspoken feeling passing between them. Xavier crossed to her side and reached for the baby. "Let me put him down," he offered. "You should rest." As he took William, his hand brushed against hers. Without thinking, he caught it, holding it gently in his own. Josephine looked up at him, surprise giving way to something warmer. "Josephine," he began, uncertain how to express what he was feeling. "I know," she said softly. "I feel it too." Xavier laid William in his cradle, then returned to Josephine's side. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning at first, then deepening as she responded. When they finally parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "I never planned this," he confessed. "Neither did I," she smiled. "But some of the best things in life are unplanned, like William." "Like William," she agreed, "and like finding you." Xavier took her hands in his. "I can't offer much. I'm not a wealthy man, but everything I have, everything I am, is yours if you want it." Tears glistened in Josephine's eyes. "I want it. I want you, Xavier. You've become my home." The kiss that followed sealed a promise between them, one born of shared hardship and growing affection. nurtured through long winter nights and tender care for a child who united them. Spring arrived earlier than expected, the mountain passes clearing by late March. Xavier sent a letter ahead to Jim Hollister, explaining the change in circumstances and his intention to bring not just himself, but Josephine and William to Virginia City. The response came 2 weeks later, characteristic of Jim's direct nature. "About time you found a good woman. Boarding house needs a woman's touch. Silver's looking promising. Bring your family and come soon. Room waiting for all three." Preparations for the journey occupied their days. Xavier purchased a sturdy wagon and a team of horses from a settler leaving the area. Josephine sewed travel clothes for herself and William, packed their few possessions, and preserved food for the journey. The night before their planned departure, Xavier presented Josephine with a small wooden box. "What's this?" she asked, accepting it curiously. "Open it." Inside lay a simple gold band. Josephine looked up at him, eyes wide. "It was my mother's," Xavier explained. "My father gave it to her the day they were married. She gave it to me before she died, said to save it for the woman who captured my heart." He took a deep breath. "I know it's soon. I know we've only known each other a few months, but I love you, Josephine. I love William as if he were my own. I want us to be a family officially." Tears spilled down Josephine's cheeks. "Are you asking me to marry you, Xavier Eastwood?" "I am," he confirmed. "If you'll have me." "Yes," she said without hesitation. 1,000 times yes. The Reverend Collins, Fort Owen's visiting minister, performed the ceremony the next morning in the trading post. The Wilsons stood as witnesses, along with Dr. Simmons and several others who had become friends during their months at the fort. William, dressed in his finest clothes sewn by Mrs. Wilson, slept peacefully in a basket throughout the proceedings. As the sun reached its zenith, the newly formed Eastwood family set out for Virginia City. Xavier drove the wagon, with Josephine beside him holding William, and Titan tied behind. The journey would take weeks, but they were in no rush. Spring painted the landscape in vibrant greens and wildflowers, a stark contrast to the snow-covered terrain of their first meeting. They traveled south through the Bitterroot Valley, then east across mountain passes still bearing patches of snow. Nights were spent beside campfires, William sleeping between them in a makeshift cradle, the stars a canopy overhead. Days brought new vistas, small settlements, and encounters with other travelers heading west or east. Xavier found himself appreciating the journey in a way he never had when traveling alone. Through Josephine's eyes, he saw beauty in places he'd taken for granted. Through William's reactions to new sights and sounds, he rediscovered wonder. As they approached Virginia City in early May, the landscape changed, becoming more rugged, marked by mining operations both active and abandoned. The town itself sprawled across hillsides, a bustling hub of activity centered around the gold and silver discoveries that had transformed the region. Jim Hollister was waiting when they arrived, a bear of a man with a graying beard and weathered face that broke into a wide grin at the sight of them. "Xavier Eastwood, you old wolf," he boomed, helping Josephine down from the wagon with surprising gentleness. "And this must be the lovely Mrs. Eastwood and young Master William I've heard so much about." "Jim," Xavier clasped his friend's hand warmly. "Good to see you. Likewise, though I hardly recognize you. Marriage suits you, you're almost respectable looking now." Jim turned to Josephine with a gallant bow. "Madam, your beauty was not exaggerated. I can see why this rascal was so quick to claim you." Josephine laughed, immediately at ease with Jim's boisterous personality. "The claiming was mutual, Mr. Hollister, and please call me Josephine." "Jim, then." He peered at William, who regarded him solemnly from Josephine's arms. "Fine-looking boy. got his mother's eyes. The boarding house exceeded their expectations, a large two-story structure on a quiet street, well-maintained and welcoming. Jim had prepared private quarters for them on the second floor, a suite of rooms that included a small nursery for William. "Business is good," Jim explained as he showed them around. "Mines producing steady silver, not a bonanza but reliable. Boarding house stays full with miners and travelers. Been running it myself since Margaret passed, but it needs a woman's touch." He outlined his proposal. Josephine would manage the boarding house, overseeing meals, cleaning, and bookkeeping. Xavier would split his time between the mine and handling maintenance of the property. They'd receive a percentage of both businesses plus their living quarters. "It's a generous offer," Xavier said that evening as they settled into their new rooms. "It is," Josephine agreed, laying William in his new crib. "And Jim seems genuinely pleased to have us here." "Did you see his face when he held William?" Xavier nodded. "Jim never got over losing his son, having a child around again. It's good for him." "Good for all of us," Josephine said, coming to stand beside him at the window. Below, Virginia City continued its evening bustle, lights appearing in windows as dusk descended. "I think we could be happy here." Xavier slipped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "I think we could be happy anywhere as long as we're together," and they were. The months that followed saw them settle into life in Virginia City. Josephine transformed the boarding house into one of the most sought-after accommodations in town, known for its cleanliness, excellent meals, and the warm welcome extended to guests. Xavier divided his time between the silver mine, which produced steadily if not spectacularly, and improving the boarding house property. William thrived, growing into a curious, cheerful toddler who charmed everyone he met. Jim Hollister became a doting honorary grandfather, bringing the boy wooden toys carved by his own hands and teaching him to fish in the nearby creek as soon as he could walk steadily. A year after their arrival in Virginia City, Josephine discovered she was expecting again. Xavier's joy at the news was boundless. When their daughter, Catherine Margaret Eastwood, was born in the winter of 1877, their happiness felt complete. The following spring, with both businesses prospering, Xavier and Jim purchased adjoining parcels of land just outside town. While Jim had no interest in ranching himself, he recognized a good investment. For Xavier, it was the fulfillment of a long-held dream, land of his own where he could raise horses and cattle, where his children could grow up with space to roam. They built a home there, not grand, but solid and comfortable, with room to expand as their family grew. Josephine continued managing the boarding house, riding into town most days with the children, returning home in the evenings to the ranch that became known throughout the region for its fine horses. On the 5th anniversary of the day, Xavier found Josephine trapped beneath the broken wagon. They stood together on the porch of their home, watching William and Catherine play in the yard with the newest addition to their family, 2-year-old James Xavier Eastwood. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out?" Josephine asked, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "If you hadn't come along that day," Xavier tightened his arm around her. "Sometimes. But then I remember something my mother used to say, that the spirits guide our steps to where we're meant to be, even when the path seems random." "I like that thought," Josephine said softly. "That we were always meant to find each other." "We were," Xavier said with quiet certainty. "And I thank whatever spirits led me down that trail every single day." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, they watched their children's laughter rise like prayer into the evening air, a testament to a love born of chance and hardship, nurtured through sacrifice and kindness, and grown into something enduring and true. William raced up to them, his face alight with the joy of childhood. "Papa, Mama, come see what I found." Hand in hand, Xavier and Josephine followed their son into the gathering dusk, their hearts full with the knowledge that the greatest treasure they would ever find was not silver or gold, but the life they had built together from the moment a cowboy found her trapped beneath a broken wagon, her unborn child their only hope.